Have you ever noticed how the men who seem the most put together are often the ones carrying the heaviest weight? How the guy who never complains, who always has it handled, who shows up no matter what, how he's sometimes the one who's quietly falling apart. There's something strange about masculinity in the modern world. We're told to be strong but vulnerable, to lead but listen, to provide but not define ourselves by provision. We're handed contradictions and expected to navigate them flawlessly. And when we struggle, when we crack under the pressure, we're told we're doing it wrong. But here's the thing, what if the struggle itself is the point? What if getting better isn't about finally figuring it all out, but about changing your relationship with the journey entirely? Let's start with something simple. You wake up tomorrow morning and you tell yourself, today I'm going to be better. Better at work, better in your relationships, better at managing your emotions, better at being the man you think you should be. And here's what happens. You try, you really do. You bite your tongue when you want to snap. You push through when you want to quit. You show up when every fiber of your being wants to disappear. And at the end of the day, you look back and think, was that enough? Am I better now? The answer always feels like no. Here's the truth. The advice you've been getting about becoming a better man. Most of it is incomplete, not wrong necessarily, just incomplete, because it focuses on behaviors without addressing the architecture underneath. It's like trying to renovate a house while ignoring the foundation, and this is where it gets interesting. The psychology behind self-improvement runs deeper than most people realize. There's a concept in psychological research called the growth mindset, popularized by Carol Dweck. You've probably heard of it. The idea that believing you can improve actually helps you improve. That seeing challenges as opportunities rather than threats changes everything. But here's what's fascinating. The growth mindset doesn't work the way most men apply it, because we take it and turn it into another standard to meet, another way to judge ourselves. I should have a growth mindset becomes just another item on the list of things we're failing at. You see, attachment theory tells us something crucial about how we relate to ourselves. The way you were taught to handle difficulty as a child, whether your struggles were met with support or dismissal, whether your emotions were validated or minimized, that creates a template, a blueprint for how you treat yourself when things get hard. And for a lot of men, that blueprint says, push through, don't complain, figure it out alone. So when you try to get better, you do it the same way you were taught to do everything else, through force, through willpower, through sheer determination, and you wonder why you're exhausted. Let me paint you a picture. You're at work and something goes wrong. A project fails, a client's unhappy, a deadline gets missed, and immediately there's this voice in your head. You know the one. It sounds like disappointment and frustration and anger all mixed together. How did you let this happen? Why weren't you more careful? Everyone's going to think you're incompetent. Now, imagine if a friend came to you with the same problem. Would you talk to them that way? Would you pile on the criticism and shame? Or would you say something like, hey, it happens. What can we learn from this? How can we move forward? The difference is staggering. And yet most men don't even notice the cruelty of their own inner dialogue. It's just normal. It's how we've always talked to ourselves. But here's what's really happening. Every time you speak to yourself with contempt, you're reinforcing a neural pathway. You're teaching your brain that this is what you deserve when you fall short. And over time, that voice doesn't just criticize your failures, it anticipates them. It becomes the background noise of your entire existence. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network. It's the brain's autopilot, the thoughts that arise when you're not focused on something specific. And for many men, that autopilot is relentlessly negative. And this is where it gets complex. Because you can't just decide to be kinder to yourself. It's not a switch you flip. The voice of self-criticism exists for a reason. It's trying to protect you, trying to make sure you never fail again, never disappoint anyone again, never feel that shame again. It's just doing it in the worst possible way. Think about it. When you were young, maybe criticism motivated you. Maybe a coach or a parent or a teacher pushed you hard and you performed. Maybe you learned that harsh words create results. And somewhere along the way, you internalized that coach, that parent, that teacher. You became your own harshest critic because, on some level, you believe that's what keeps you sharp. But here's the truth. Research on motivation is clear. Self-criticism might work in the short term, but it's devastating in the long term. It increases anxiety, feeds depression, and actually decreases your ability to learn from mistakes. Because when you're drowning in shame, you can't think clearly, you can't problem solve, you just survive. Self-compassion, on the other hand, treating yourself the way you treat someone you care about, that's what actually drives sustainable growth. Studies by Kristin Neff and others show that people who practice self-compassion are more resilient, more motivated, and better at handling failure. But for a lot of men, self-compassion feels dangerous. It feels like weakness. Like if you go easy on yourself, you'll become lazy, complacent, less than what you could be. So let's talk about strength for a moment. You've been taught that strength is endurance. It's showing up no matter what. It's carrying the weight without complaint. And there's truth in that. Real truth. The ability to persist through difficulty is valuable. The willingness to shoulder responsibility is noble. But here's what's missing from that equation: discernment. Strength without discernment is just stubbornness. It's grinding yourself down for things that don't matter. It's sacrificing your well-being for standards that no one actually cares about, except you. Real strength includes knowing when to push and when to rest, when to carry the load and when to ask for help, when to persist and when to pivot. And that kind of strength? It requires self-awareness, it requires honesty, it requires the ability to check in with yourself and ask, how am I actually doing? But most men don't have that ability, not because they're incapable, but because they've never been taught. In fact, they've been actively taught the opposite, that checking in with yourself is indulgent, that focusing on your own needs is selfish, that real men don't need to process their emotions, they just handle things. And maybe that's the real tragedy here. Not that men struggle, but that they struggle alone. Not that they carry weight, but that they believe asking for help would make them less worthy of carrying it. Let me share something with you. Mirror neurons. They're these specialized brain cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing it. They're why yawns are contagious, why watching someone get hurt makes you wince. They're the neurological basis for empathy. And here's what's fascinating. Mirror neurons don't just help you understand others, they help you understand yourself. When you're around people who validate your experience, who reflect your emotions back to you with understanding, your brain literally learns that your feelings make sense. But when you're constantly around people who dismiss what you're going through, or worse, when you're isolated, processing everything alone, those mirror neurons don't fire in the same way. You lose the ability to validate your own experience. You start to wonder if what you're feeling is legitimate or if you're just being weak. This is why isolation is so dangerous for men. Not just the obvious loneliness, but the way it warps your perception of reality. When you don't have anyone reflecting your experience back to you, you lose the ability to trust yourself. You start to think, everyone else seems fine, everyone else is handling this, what's wrong with me? But the truth is, everyone else is not fine. They're just hiding it the same way you are. So what does getting better actually look like? Not the Instagram version, not the motivational poster, the real version. It starts with telling the truth. To yourself first, about how you're actually doing, about what you're actually feeling, about what's actually hard. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because telling the truth means admitting things you've been taught not to admit. That you're tired, that you're scared, that you don't have all the answers, that sometimes you're just going through the motions and hoping no one notices. There's this concept in psychology called emotional granularity. It's the ability to distinguish between different emotional states with precision. Most people, and especially men, have low emotional granularity. They experience a whole range of feelings, but label them all as fine or stressed or angry. But here's what research shows. The more precisely you can identify what you're feeling, the better you can regulate those feelings. If you just know you feel bad, you don't know what to do about it. But if you can say, I feel disappointed in myself and anxious about what others think and exhausted from trying to keep it together, now you have something to work with. Getting better means developing that precision. It means learning the vocabulary of your own inner life. And then, after the truth, comes something even harder: acceptance. Not resignation, not giving up, acceptance. Acceptance means seeing reality clearly and working with what is, not what should be. It means acknowledging that you're struggling without making it mean something catastrophic about your worth. Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, had this insight. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. Read that again. When you accept yourself as you are, then you can change. Because change doesn't come from self-hatred, it comes from self-understanding. When you stop spending all your energy fighting against yourself, criticizing yourself, trying to force yourself into some ideal shape, when you stop doing that, you suddenly have energy for actual growth. But acceptance is terrifying for men, because we've been taught that accepting our limitations means settling, that if we stop being hard on ourselves, we'll stop trying, that the only thing keeping us from complete collapse is constant vigilance and criticism. What if that's backwards? What if the constant criticism is what's keeping you stuck? What if acceptance is what finally allows you to move forward? Here's a truth that's hard to swallow. Some of what you're trying to fix isn't broken. Some of what you see as weakness is actually sensitivity. Some of what you see as failure is actually learning. Some of what you see as inadequacy is actually humanity. You're comparing your inside to everyone else's outside. You're measuring your messy reality against their curated highlights. And you're losing every time, not because you're deficient, but because the comparison itself is rigged. There's research on something called pluralistic ignorance. It's when everyone in a group privately rejects a norm but believes everyone else accepts it, so they go along with it. And masculinity is drowning in pluralistic ignorance. Most men privately feel uncertain, vulnerable, confused, but everyone projects confidence, so everyone assumes they're the only one struggling, and the silence perpetuates itself. Breaking that silence, even just with yourself, is revolutionary. So let's get practical for a moment. If you want to get better, here's where to start. Not with a massive overhaul, not with a complete transformation. Start with one thing. Start with noticing. Just noticing. Notice when that critical voice shows up. Notice what triggers it. Notice the tone it uses, the words it chooses. Don't try to change it yet. Just notice it. Because here's what's fascinating about awareness. It automatically creates distance. When you notice the voice, you realize it's not the same as you. It's a part of you, sure, but it's not all of you. And that distinction changes everything. Then, when you're ready, try this. When the critical voice shows up, ask it, what are you trying to protect me from? Not, why are you so mean? Not, shut up. Just, what are you trying to protect me from? And listen, really listen, because that voice, harsh as it is trying to keep you safe. It's trying to make sure you never experience whatever pain taught you to be this way in the first place. And when you understand what it's protecting you from, you can start to address the actual fear. Not the symptom, the criticism, but the root, the fear. Here's something else you need to know. Getting better isn't linear. You're going to have good days and bad days. Days when you feel clear and capable, and days when you feel like you're back at square one. And on those bad days, the critical voice is going to tell you that you're not making progress, that you're failing, that you should just give up. But that voice is wrong. Growth isn't a straight line upward, it's a spiral. You come back around to the same issues, the same patterns, the same struggles, but each time you're at a different level. Each time you have more perspective, more tools, more understanding. The fact that you're struggling doesn't mean you're not growing. Sometimes it means exactly the opposite. It means you're finally strong enough to face what you've been avoiding. There's a concept in therapy called titration. It means approaching difficult material in small doses at a pace you can handle. You don't have to fix everything at once. You don't have to become a different person overnight. You just have to take the next right step. And sometimes the next right step is rest. Sometimes it's asking for help. Sometimes it's admitting you don't know what the next step is and sitting with that uncertainty. Let's talk about connection for a moment, because you can't do this alone. I know. You've been doing it alone. You've had to. There was no one to talk to, no one who would understand, no one you trusted with the depth of what you're carrying. But here's the truth. Isolation is killing you, slowly, quietly, but killing you nonetheless. And I'm not talking about forced vulnerability. I'm not telling you to go pour your heart out to someone who hasn't earned that trust. Connection isn't about oversharing with strangers. It's about finding one person, just one, who you can be real with. Someone who won't judge you for struggling. Someone who won't try to fix you or dismiss what you're going through. Someone who can just be there. And if you don't have that person yet, that's okay. Start smaller. Start with a therapist if you can. Start with an online community where anonymity gives you permission to be honest. Start with journaling, which is really just connection with yourself. Because here's what happens when you break the silence. When you name what you're going through and someone responds with understanding instead of judgment, something shifts. The shame loses its grip. The isolation cracks open. You realize you're not as alone as you thought. And that realization, that's often the beginning of real change. You know what's interesting? The men who get better, who actually transform their lives in meaningful ways, they're not the ones who never struggle. They're not the ones who have it all figured out. They're the ones who learn to struggle differently. They're the ones who stop treating every setback as evidence of their inadequacy, who stop measuring their worth by their productivity, who stop believing that pain is weakness and start understanding it as information. They're the ones who build a different relationship with themselves, not based on performance or achievement or meeting some impossible standard, but based on honest reckoning with who they are, what they need, and what actually matters. And maybe that's the real advice here. Maybe getting better isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully yourself, including the parts you've been taught to hide or fix or be ashamed of. Here's what I want you to understand. You're not broken. You're carrying weight that wasn't meant to be carried alone. operating under rules that were written for a different world, trying to meet standards that were designed to be unattainable. And the fact that you're struggling under those conditions, that doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. The fact that you keep showing up, keep trying, keep reaching for better even when you're exhausted, that's not inadequacy, that's courage. But courage doesn't mean you have to do it through force anymore. It doesn't mean you have to white knuckle your way through everything. Courage can also look like asking for help, like admitting you don't have all the answers, like treating yourself with the same compassion you'd offer someone you love. Getting better starts with getting honest, with getting real, with getting okay with the fact that you're a human being with limitations and needs and the occasional complete breakdown, and that's not something to fix, it's something to acknowledge. So here's my advice, if you're ready for it. Stop trying to be the man you think you should be. Stop measuring yourself against some phantom ideal. Stop treating your humanity like a problem to solve. Start asking different questions. Not, what's wrong with me, but what am I carrying? Not, why can't I handle this, but what support do I need? Not, how do I fix myself, but how do I understand myself? And start small. You don't need a complete transformation tomorrow. You need one honest conversation with yourself today. One moment of self-compassion, one acknowledgement that what you're going through is hard, and it's okay that it's hard. Because here's the thing about getting better. It's not a destination. It's not something you achieve and then you're done. It's a practice, a daily choice to treat yourself with a little more kindness, to tell yourself a little more truth, to reach out instead of isolating, to rest instead of pushing through. And some days you'll do it well, and some days you'll forget everything you've learned and fall back into old patterns. And that's okay too. That's part of it. Remember how we started? With the observation that the men who seem most put together are often carrying the heaviest weight. Here's what I've learned. The weight doesn't get lighter, not really, but your capacity to carry it changes when you stop pretending it isn't heavy, when you stop measuring your worth by how effortless you make it look. The paradox is this: admitting you're struggling makes you stronger. Asking for help makes you more capable. Being honest about your limitations actually expands them, because you're no longer spending all your energy maintaining the illusion. You can direct that energy toward actual growth, and maybe that's the real measure of getting better. Not whether you've eliminated all struggle, not whether you've become some idealized version of masculinity, but whether you've learned to be with yourself, all of yourself, with a little more honesty, a little more compassion, a little more grace. You don't need to be fixed, you need to be understood, starting with yourself. That's the advice, that's the path forward. Not easier, necessarily, but truer. And true is always better than perfect.